Hello everyone, my name is Matthew, and today we will be learning about the Codex Mendoza. The Codex Mendoza is a post-Columbian work of literature that provides readers a glimpse of Mexica history and culture. We'll be using the Codex Mendoza to talk about the territorial expansion of the Mexica under specific Tlatoani, also known as speakers, who led and ruled what we call the Aztec Empire. But before we get to that, we will learn the historical context of the Codex Mendoza and finish off by describing why this document is significant when it comes to learning about Mexican cultures. For context, after the conquest of Tenochtitlan and the rest of Mesoamerica, the Spanish established their colony of Nueva España or New Spain. In 1535, over a decade after the conquest, King Charles V of Spain appointed Antonio de Mendoza as Viceroy of New Spain. Antonio de Mendoza was to govern New Spain for the Spanish crown, quell uprisings, control rivaling conquistadors, and increase revenue for the royal treasury. Although this is uncertain, many believe that under his governorship, Mendoza commissioned the acclaimed Codex Mendoza, which, in its 71 folios, describes the history of the Mexica, their customs, and their form of government. The Codex Mendoza was made in the city of Tenochtitlan, modern-day Mexico City, by Mexica artists and scribes, who produced the illustrations, and an unidentified Spanish friar, who produced the translation, which is in Spanish. The Codex Mendoza can be divided into three sections. The first section of the Codex, consisting of the first 16 folios, tells us about the founding of Tenochtitlan and the reigns of specific Tlatoani, their achievements, and their conquests. The second section, consisting of 39 folios, focuses on the tribute system and what goods and commodities would be collected from various provinces across the empire. Finally, the last part, also consisting of 16 folios, tells us about the daily life and customs of the Mexica, such as trade, rituals, agriculture, and warfare, among many other aspects of Mexica society. As for how the Codex Mendoza reached the Bodleian Library in Oxford, it is unclear how the document reached the hands of its first recorded owner, André Chevet, who was a French writer. The Codex Mendoza was then passed on to Richard Hakluyt, who was an English writer. After Hakluyt's death in 1616, the Codex Mendoza was passed to Samuel Purchas, who was an English cleric. After Purchas's death in 1626, the book was given to English jurist, politician, and author John Selden. 5 years after his death in 1654, the Codex Mendoza finally made its way to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The Codex Mendoza is now available online, which is what allowed us to talk about the first part of the document, the founding of Tenochtitlan, the military expansions of the Tlatoani, and their achievements. According to the Codex Mendoza, in 1324, the Mexicans settled in the Valley of Mexico. The land the Mexica settled on was marshy and inundated, but in the middle of the marsh, the Mexica found an eagle sitting on a cactus eating a snake, which is displayed on today's Mexican flag. The Mexica decided to build their settlements in the marshy area because it was bountiful in birds and fish on which to sustain themselves, there were many towns around to trade with, and the water surrounding the marsh would protect them from invaders. They called the place Tenochtitlan, which roughly means prickly pear cactus growing on a stone. Eventually, the people organized themselves and elected Tenoch as their first leader, and subsequently began to grow and expand, subduing neighboring towns such as Culhuacan and Tenayucan in the process. To track down the years, the Mexica typically counted them by 13, as seen with the circles indicated in the compartments, which represent numbers. The Mexica used symbols starting from rabbit, corn, flint knife, house, and going back to rabbit to count the years. The compartment that has a tree branch sticking out of it is thought of as a year of misfortune, which appears every 52 years, because it was said that previously the people would experience floods, solar eclipses, and earthquakes. This is typically when the Mexica performed many sacrifices and ceremonies for their gods. On a specific day, they would do their best to avoid misbehaving and would keep the fires of their homes off until the end of the day. In 1377, Acampixli became the Lord of Mexico up to 1398, with his reign lasting for 21 years. During his reign, the Mexica subjugated the pueblos, or towns, called Guanajuac, Mixquiac, Huitlahuac, and Xochimilco, which became vassals and tributaries. In Acampixli, we begin to see a trend. The Tlatoani tended to have many wives and children who became the ancestors of various warriors that helped increase and expand the power of the Mexica. In 1396, Huitzilopochtli, son of Acampixli, became lord, with his reign lasting for 21 years as well. Under his reign, the towns of Tutitlán, Cuajititlan, Chalco, Tulancingo, Xaltocan, Otompa, and Acolman and Texcoco were subjugated. Another trend we see in Huitzilopochtli is that the Tlatoani were described to be very warlike in battle, because one of the factors that led to someone becoming a successful Tlatoani was military prowess. To be a Tlatoani, you needed to be able to protect the empire and expand its territories through expeditions. In 1417, Chimalpopoca, son of Huitzilopochtli, became the Lord of Mexico, with his reign lasting for 10 years. Under his reign, he subjugated the towns of Texquiac and Chalco. If you didn't notice, the town of Chalco had already been subjugated under the reign of Huitzilopochtli. However, the town of Chalco, being a powerful town, rebelled against the Mexica, killed 5 Mexicans, and destroyed 4 canoes, which is why Chimalpopoca subjugated Chalco again. In 1427, Ixcoatl, son of Acampichli, became the Lord of Mexico, with his rule lasting for 13 years. Under his rule, the Mexica subjugated an unprecedented 24 towns. Just like his father, he was valiant and warlike, and described as a clever man with good judgment. These traits allowed him to conquer all 24 towns in just one expedition. In 1440, Moctezuma Ilhuicamina, son of Huitzilopochtli, became Lord of Mexico, with his reign lasting 29 years. Under his rule, the Mexica subjugated 33 towns. He was described to be a very serious, virtuous, good-tempered man with good judgment and an enemy of evil. While he punished those who broke law severely, he wasn't cruel and deeply cared and was kind to his subjects. Unlike his predecessors, he had few wives and only 2 children. Through the severity of his actions and his leading by example, Moctezuma Ilhuicamina was feared but deeply respected. In 1469, Axayacatl, grandson of Itzcoatl, became Lord of Mexico, with his reign lasting for 12 years. Under his rule, the Mexica conquered 37 towns, most notable being Tlatelolco. Tlatelolco was also a very powerful pueblo, much like Chalco. Tlatelolco had the biggest trade market in the empire, and believed the reason that Tenochs from Tenochtitlan were so successful was because the Tenochs received so much support from Tlatelolco. This animosity caused Tlatelolco to rebel, but they succumbed to the Tenochs. Like many of his predecessors, Axayacatl was described to be warlike and valiant, but he was also prideful and extremely attracted to women, explaining why he had so many wives and children. He was also greatly feared and upheld the laws the previous Tlatoani instated. In 1482, Tizoc, Axayacatl's brother, became Lord of Mexico, with his reign lasting for 5 years. Under his rule, the Mexica subjugated 14 towns. Even before becoming Tlatoani, Tizoc was extremely valiant in battle, which awarded him the title of Tlatelecatl. The title of Tlacatecatl is another common trend among Tlatoani. As stated previously, to become Tlatoani, one needed to be successful in battle, and the title of Tlacatecatl made it easier for an individual to become selected as Tlatoani. He was described to be a very serious and severe leader, deeply feared and respected by his subjects because he punished the crimes of his subjects severely, but preserved and upheld the laws of his predecessors so much that his reign was well ordered and well governed. In 1486, Aguitzotl, Tizoc's brother, became Lord of Mexico with his reign lasting of 16 years. Under his rule, the Mexica subjugated 44 towns. Just like his brother, he also earned the title Tlacatecatl, which means Great Captain, increasing his chances of becoming Tlatoani. He also upheld the rules of his predecessors and was virtuous. Throughout the decades, the Mexicans had accumulated so much wealth and power and subjugated a vast area of territory that supplied the capitals with goods and tribute. This immense wealth allowed Ahuitzotl to be generous with his friends. He was described to be gentle, which is why he was greatly loved by his captains and his subjects. His subjects revered and adored him so much that they would go to his residence to entertain him by throwing feasts and playing music. In 1502, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, Axayatl's son, became Lord of Mexico. Under his rule, the Mexica subjugated 44 towns, and were at their height, with the state prospering and advancing so much that they controlled most of the towns that would become a part of New Spain. He was an extremely capable leader in war and also carried the Tlacatecatl title. He was so good at warfare that he was greatly feared by not only his vassals, but by his captains and leaders, that during negotiations no one would dare look at his face and would keep their heads bowed. Moctezuma was described to be a wise leader, skilled in many topics such as astrology and philosophy. He was deeply respected because of his poise, power, and demeanor. He also upheld the laws of his predecessors and even expanded upon them if he saw that the government needed improvement. He was paid a great deal of tribute by his subjects because he increased the demands for tribute and employed caciques, or governors, greatly increasing the wealth of the Mexica. Under his rule, the Spanish arrived, and a year after their arrival, his reign of 18 years would come to an end. Subsequently, the Spanish subjected the Mexicans and took over Tenochtitlan and the surrounding towns. The Codex Mendoza is an important document when it comes to studying Mexican cultures, specifically the Mexica, because the Codex Mendoza provides insight as to how the Aztec Empire operated. The history of Tenochtitlan's founding is important because it demonstrates the cultural significance of the city and why its defendable geographic position helped the Mexica become the most successful group in the region. Moreover, the records of the military expansions of the Mexica are significant because they provide researchers with written records of under whom the Mexica expanded and where, explaining how the Mexica became so wealthy. Even though this video didn't talk about it, the tribute system depicted in the Codex Mendoza is important because it offers insight of the Mexica's economic and political system as conquered towns provided the capital with resources, which is what contributed to the military success of the Mexica. The tribute system also demonstrates that the Mexican view of warfare was different from the Western view on warfare. In the West, the goal of war was to completely destroy the enemy, while from the Mexican perspective, the goal of war was to subjugate the enemy and extract resources from them. Finally, the daily life and customs of the Mexica depicted in the Codex Mendoza is important because they give people a glimpse on how people from the different social classes lived and how social class was expressed through hair and clothing. The third part also gives us an understanding of Mexican religious practices, such as what attire is worn and what sacrifices are made, as well as ceremonies and festivals the Mexicas celebrated and their cultural significance. Finally, the Codex Mendoza displays the economic activity the Mexica did, such as agriculture and weaving, as well as trade, which allows people to understand how the Mexica made a living. Overall, the Codex Mendoza is an invaluable document that demonstrates the pre-Columbian Mesoamerican culture that has since been lost to history. Moreover, given the time the Codex Mendoza was written, the document demonstrates the simultaneous existence of Nahua culture in the form of pictographs and the Spanish culture in the form of the Latin alphabet.